Variations on a theme. Race is a social construct. Races don't exist biologically, or sentences that put race in quotes. To start, race is in fact a social construct. So is a chair, so is a color, or any other biological category. Categories do not objectively, tangibly exist outside of the rubric of a categorizer, i.e. they are a social construct. You may say that a pine cone is different from a salamander, but at the level of the quantum foam, well, they pretty much look the same to me. Any construct can be deconstructed. Why differentiate cars and trucks? After all, cars and trucks are more similar than different, and there are some vehicles that fit into both the category of car or truck, or neither, depending on how you see it. You can construct or deconstruct as much as you please. To say that race is a social construct is a trivial truth. It's like when biblical creationists say that evolution is just a theory. Now, here I would like to present some data in terms of FST distances. FST simply means the proportion of variation within a population compared to the variation between populations. For example, the average FST distance between two breeds of gray wolves in North America is 0.168. This means that 16.8% of the variation is between breeds, 83.2% is within breeds. For human populations, it is between 0.155 and 0.121, depending on how you divide up the breeds, or population, subspecies, or whatever synonym for race you want to use. Now, you can deny the existence of human races despite this data. That's fine. They don't objectively exist, no more than breeds of coyotes objectively exist. But if you are going to deny human races, well, to remain consistent, you're going to also have to deny the existence of many other commonly accepted subspecies. Of course, this stupidly high level of skepticism is, in fact, only applied to human breeds. Now, a common response to this is to make Lewontin's fallacy. And in the description is a link to the Wikipedia page on Lewontin's fallacy. Lewontin's fallacy is when someone says that, for example, if human genetic variation is 15% between race and 85% within race, well, you will have a 42.5% chance of being closer to someone of a different race than to someone of your own race. While still more likely to be closer to someone of your own race, there is still a very, very large chance that you're closer to a particular member of another race. And beyond that, of course, you are closer to the midpoint of another race than you are to any particular member of your own race. This is wrong. First, I will explain it theoretically, and then I will give proof. There is more variation within than between races, but it's at the gene-by-gene level, not at the aggregate level. Let's imagine on a single gene there is an A variant and a B variant. Europeans have 60% A variant and 40% B variant, while Africans have 60% B variant and 40% A variant. If you try to classify blacks and whites just based on this one gene, well, you would be correct only 60% of the time. This is because you would classify everyone with the A variant as European and anyone with the B variant as African. Since 40% of Europeans will have the B variant and 40% of Africans will have the A variant, 40% of people in both groups will be quote-unquote misclassified. If you categorized using 100 genes like this, then your correct classification will rise to 97.3% of the time, meaning 97.3% of the time Africans would have at least 51 out of 100 gene variants predominantly found in Africans. Ditto for Europeans. If you have 1,000 genes like this, then you will have a virtually 100% correct classification rate, meaning virtually 100% of Europeans would have at least 501 out of 1,000 gene variants, predominantly in the Europeans, vice versa for Africans. In the movie Race, The Power of an Illusion, they gave students a genetic test which tested for a very small number of markers, and of course this had a high miscategorization rate. I think they tested like 30 markers or something. And as you would expect from a small number of markers. And this was then used to argue for Lewontin's fallacy. And so yes, there is more variation within gray wolf breeds than between gray wolf breeds at the gene-by-gene level, but not at the level of the whole genome. The odds that a single gray wolf would be closer to a member of another breed than to a member of his own breed is virtually zero. human breeds, or races, work the same way. Now, in the study, Genetic Structure, Self-Identified Race and Ethnicity, and Confounding in Case-Control Association Studies, led by Neil Risch, they found that the self-identified race corresponded with best fit genetic cluster at over 99.8% of the time within a group of self-identified Caucasians, Africans, Hispanics, and East Asians in the United States. Now, what surprised me here was just how well the Hispanics clustered, given that the average admixture of an Hispanic in the U.S. is about 60% European, 35% American, and 5% African. What this shows is that self-identification for human races works 99.8% of the time, at least in this sample in the United States. This gets into, well, how does one initially categorize a human into a breed, right? And this is a good question. How is the initial categorization being made? Now, we can see how well these categorizations fit with best fit genetic cluster, but how is that first initial categorization being made? Okay, keep in mind that this same question can be applied to breeds of wild horses. Now, horse breeds categorization is done through the use of various metrics, right? They measure the snout, ears, hooves, or whatever they need to measure to make the initial classification into a breed. And at the turn of the century, that's what the scientific racialists did, right? They would measure various parts of the body. They would make kind of a gestalt. They would look at the various metrics in the jaw and the nose and all this stuff, and they would measure various parts of the body before making the initial classification into a race. And they would use skin color, right, as one of the many things. They would use hair. Well, what kind of hair do they have? They would make hair classification, maybe have little tables to have a little sliding scale of hair textures, okay? But after World War II, scientific racialism fell out of fashion, right? And these kinds of things kind of got brushed under the rug. And so today, the world lacks a robust method of initial classification for human breeds, the kind that they have for horses. Okay, so let's go back to those FST values. FST values can be seen as a sort of inverse kinship coefficient between populations. So here are various FST values between Europeans and other human breeds. Now, we could do every single relationship, but that would take too long, and this channel is primarily focused on European racial interests, so I take an explicitly and unapologetically Eurocentric approach in my analysis. Okay, so you can see those numbers here, and what this means, assuming this data is correct, let's go ahead and put in the family relations there as well. What this means, assuming this data is correct, is that you are closer to a random white person than a random person of another race, to the same degree that you are closer to your cousin than to a random member of your own race. In the case of Africans, the racial anti-kinship, we can look at it as, is greater than the familial kinship at the level of first cousin. The last thing I want to talk about is gender. Males and females differ on the Y chromosome. What happens is that certain genes on the Y chromosome disable analog genes on the X chromosome. There are 86 genes on the Y chromosome and roughly 2,000 genes on the X chromosome. So in males, the Y chromosome gets expressed and the 86 analog genes on the X chromosome get shut off. They get deactivated. Females who have 2 X chromosomes have one of them deactivated. This is known as X inactivation. Okay, and that's the difference between males and females. On the rest of the genome, there are roughly 22,500 protein-coding genes. If you treat males and females as different populations, this would come out to an FST distance between the two of 0.004, because the variation within is all shared. That's 22,500 protein-coding genes, and the variation between groups is on 86 genes. Now, gender differences are a hard break. That is true. It's the Y chromosome. You either have it or you don't. The Y chromosome, I look at it as kind of like a series of dip switches on a hardware thing. Race differences are gradient. It's a matter of frequencies, as talked about earlier, meaning that males and females have entirely different genes, have a few entirely different genes. That is, no female has the male sex chromosome, right? Whereas an African could have a gene for eye color that is more predominant among Europeans. But overall, the race differences in allele frequencies dwarf gender differences overall. right? Even though they are qualitatively different. Those who say that gender differences are greater than race differences, they're only counting these hard breaks, not the allele frequency differences. If you include the allele frequency differences, race swamps gender. Okay, so to conclude, yes, race is a social construct. People who say this as if it's some kind of argument aren't lying per se, but they are stating a vacuous, trivial truth and either hoping that the listener will draw certain conclusions or they themselves are ignorant as to how this is a vacuous, trivial truth. Human races are comparable to breeds of other animals which have a global range. You can say that human races don't exist, that it is just a category after all, but to remain consistent you would have to deny many other commonly accepted breeds of other mammals. You would have to say that they don't exist either. And these differences are profound. The magnitude of the FSD distances between races is roughly the same as the kinship coefficient of the first cousin. It is true that there is more variation within than between races, but only on any given gene. And it would be to make Lewontin's fallacy to think that this means that you have a higher probability of being genetically closer to a black person than to a white person. At the level of the whole genome, there is practically zero chance of you being genetically closer to someone of another race. And these race differences completely dwarf gender differences.